Dr. Elaine today. Dr. All received her PhD in American Literature and Feminist Theory from Emory University. She's currently a professor of contemporary literature and women's studies at North Carolina State University. Elaine has received numerous writing fellowships in creative nonfiction from the North Carolina and the Virginia Center for Creative Arts. She has also won grants from several agencies, including the NEH and the North Carolina Arts Council. In addition to the book from which you will read today, The Gods of Noonday, Dr. Orr has published 2 scholarly books, Subject to Negotiations, Reading Feminist Criticism and American Women's Fictions, and Tilly Olson and the Feminist Spiritual Version. Gods of Noonday was nominated as one of the best books of 2003 in the creative nonfiction category by the Southeastern Booksellers Association. Elaine and I have quite a few things in common. In fact, we've known each other for a long time, even though we didn't know it. Indeed, as the Yoruba say, Omileniyan, bí a kò bá pàdé lódò, a pàdé nísàlẹ̀. We all are but like the drops of water. If we do not meet upstream, we shall meet downstream. Both of us were born in the same year, in the same region, which would be equivalent to the same state, and to the same nationality, the same ethnic group, the Yoruba. I have also briefly lived in the town where she was born, Ogbomoso. As probably you will recall, if you work for the mission schools, you get transferred to different places. And my dad was a high school principal for the government, and he got transferred. His last posting before he retired was to Ogbomoso Grammar School. And so Ogbomoso was home to my family for about 4 years. Also, the husband of my favorite sister is a native of Ogbomoso. So we do have a lot in common indeed. Elaine is a powerful writer, and I hold her responsible for my inability to have finished reading her book before today. Her writing has evoked so much of my own childhood memories that I have spent perhaps more time recovering distant memories than reading the book, but I intend to read it. I am tempted to comment on several passages that I have read in the book, but again, the Yoruba say, "Aki shaju elede," when you are dancing, you do not move ahead of the person who's beating the talking drum. Otherwise, you end up with a mistake. So you're going to let the person who's beating the talking drum lead. Elaine, I have put on my agbada today in honor of you and your memories of Yoruba people in the place of Yoruba, the place where you first had a taste of water. May the ancestors bless your reading today. Kabo, Shida Dalode. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Elaine.
I'm already weeping. I usually don't do that until the middle. I think it's the Igbo and maybe not the Yoruba who say with crying it is only difficult at the beginning. Thank you. I had no idea. I'm going to give away the date. We were born in 1954. And I was born in Abomashaw, in Yoruba land. And my parents were Baptist medical missionaries. They had arrived in Nigeria 2 years earlier with my sister Becky. And I lived in Nigeria except for furloughs until I was 16, and then I came to the US to live permanently, but you can't really leave Nigeria permanently. And I have been back recently to make reconnections with friends I grew up with, and this has been perhaps the most fulfilling outcome of writing my memoir. I think you can go home again. Indeed, you better. I'm going to be reading from a section of the memoir. Well, it's actually an excerpt culled from several sections that was published separately and titled Southern Nigerian. And I think you'll see the development of the theme as I read. I'm trying to think, I think that the excerpt is pretty self-explanatory. I don't think there's much I need to say ahead of time. I'm not sure if we'll have time. Do we have time for some questions and discussion at the end? We might, briefly, depending.
We end at 12 o'clock.
Oh, well, we will certainly do that. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for inviting me, Ellen. I want to go to college again. I don't know what my parents were thinking when they didn't send me here. And I'm just thrilled with the hospitality here at Berry College. When I was a small girl in Nigeria, my father, after his rest time, would sometimes push my sister Becky and me on the swing set before he headed back to his job as business manager at the hospital. "Here we go to Sycamore Town," he sang over and over, his agile arms giving one daughter a push and then the other. "Here we go to Sycamore Town." For a long time I didn't wonder what the lyric meant, no more than I wondered about "Here we go round the mulberry bush," when there was no mulberry bush to go round. But at some point, Becky or I must have asked, and then the story was revealed. Sycamore is a small village close to the South Carolina hamlet of Fairfax, where my mother was born, and my parents, Annie Lee Thomas and Lloyd Houston Neal, fell in love. So while American youth were imagining a trek to the African metropolis of Timbuktu, I was being summoned to the fabulous American outpost of Sycamore. By the way, there's no comparison. Much later, my father told me that on our first furlough, before I was old enough to remember, he was approached by an old-timer in Fairfax who advised him to, quote, "take all these niggers back with you to Africa." That was 1956, the year Flannery O'Connor's Greenleaf appeared in Kenyon Review. My father never called anyone nigger. I only heard the word in the United States. Still, I was a white Southerner in Nigeria because my parents were Southern Baptist medical missionaries from South Carolina. But that's only half the story. I was also Southern Nigerian because my family and I were nestled in the heart of the Yoruba Nation in the town of Abomishaw in southern Nigeria. This is important. It means I was and am in many ways a Southerner. A partially wooded savanna region, Yoruba land was for me a distinct, if complex South, full of crossroads, there's a colon there. Churches and shrines, market women and Nigerian doctors, family portraits, and the talking drum. It is not to be confused with northern Nigeria, the home of the House of Fulani and the shrouded god Allah. To this land of palms, my parents brought dreams of southern living. My mother's early life retained the residue of southern aristocracy, and my father was the son of a Baptist preacher. In this way, I was reared in a bouquet of Southern culture, but in my case, it's hard to know which South came first. Certainly, I was perplexed by the American South I knew unfurled as once I began paying attention. Here I found a queer country of white abundance and settled weariness, and no Africans. I don't mean no black people. There were lots of black people, but there weren't any Yoruba. I've always thought my origin is of Amashaw, the dusty Yoruba town where I was born. What I most recall is the sun slamming down, ricocheting off tin roofs of mud and plaster houses that duplicated one another endlessly down 1,000 bicycle paths, splashes of puddles during the rain, and 100 women on their way to market. At the mobile station where my father fills the tank with petrol, I ponder the lifting wings of Pegasus the horse on the side of the building. I have never seen a horse, rather goats and Brahmin cattle and chickens in the road and black mambas and red-headed lizards and all manner of birds, including hawks. And once, before a missionary nurse shot it, a monitor lizard in my front yard. My reverie is interrupted when a boy my sister's age thrust a tray of Trevor mints and chewing gum in little rectangular packets through the window. "Buy chewing gum," he instructs loudly, emphasizing the word gum as if I might not understand English. "Buy chewing gum." He does not step back or retreat. When my father re-enters our vehicle, he digs for ages in his pocket before producing the 3 pence for the purchase. He stages this elongated transaction as a kind of improvisational comedy, and it works. The boy and I both laugh, though perhaps for different reasons. 3 major ethnic groups and hundreds of other minor ones inhabit modern Nigeria. Nigeria has a population of 130 million. The big 3 are the Yoruba, the Igbo, and the Hausa, Fulani. In my earliest years, I imagined that Yoruba land encompassed most of the country and most of the world. I thought all white people were missionaries. The arid territory of the huge northern region was diminished in my mind by its absence from my experience. I knew that primarily through Fulani herders on the road with their great horned cattle, and Hausa traders, tall, elegant men who brought beautiful works of art to sell to the missionaries, laying out their wares on mats on the veranda and praying to Allah as regularly as the hibiscus that opened in the morning and closed in the afternoon. When I was older, I tried without success to convert some Hausa traders to Christianity, hoping to pull them into the green pastures of our southern world, but they refused 12 steps to salvation. The British established the northern and southern protectorates of what would become Nigeria after the Berlin Conference of 1885. The 2 were amalgamated in 1914 when Nigeria was officially launched. The British always preferred the north because the aristocratic emirs provided such a fine resource for indirect rule. Here, one ruled by ruling the rulers, who then ruled the people. Governance in the South was messier because the Yoruba and Igbo were more independent-minded. When the British left Nigeria in 1960, they left a legacy of representation based on population, a system that favored the North. When the Civil War arrived in my teenage years, flying in from the Bight of Biafra like a huge bat on a motorcycle, the cause could be traced to the British-installed pattern of regionalism and northern dominance. I have always favored the South and the West. And in this sense, I'm a true daughter of Yoruba land. The staff at the Abomishaw Hospital gave me the name Bamidele, follow me home. And even today, when I consider home, it is an Abomishaw house I see, present as a God and as powerful, round and deep and colored in its fullness, a globed thing, an entire universe. Along with the lingerie, dresses, shoes, and cosmetics, assembled for her first tour, my mother packed books of instruction produced by American makers of drapery fabric. In Nigeria, in a Lagos market, she found a suitable fabric featuring ivory roses. Never mind that our tropical gardens produced frangipani and caladium. To hold the draperies so they hung evenly, she sewed English shillings into the corners of each panel. I would pay dearly today to recover those shillings and those draperies my mother dreamed of aboard the African Patriot, the freighter she, my father, and sister crossed over on. Even with those fine drapes, we had no running water in our first house. A gardener carried water for the evening baths, and we all used the same water, first Becky and me, then my mother, then my father. In spite of these hardships, it is not difficult to see that my mother's life in West Africa allowed a return to certain privileges of her grandmother's life in Carolina. She may have bathed in tepid water, but someone else had drawn it. Later, we moved to the first home I remember, a bungalow located on the high point of the compound. And I've been back, I think I said, in the past 2 years and visited this house. My first remembered Christmas was in that house. I recall waking before dawn and hearing a chorus of angels on the front porch, singing through the screens, "Joy to the world," with the most beautiful Yoruba accent. My father was with the nursing students, but their voices drowned his out. In many ways, we were the typical Southern American family in our 3-bedroom house with our station wagon, our swing set, and believe it or not, our Cocker Spaniel. In my present life, I see the same bungalow design in older North Carolina neighborhoods. As I remember it, my mother's decorating did not end with window treatments. She followed through in home decor. Never was it that our furniture lined up against the walls as in some missionary houses. My mother knew how to create clustered areas, thematic moments in a room. First, the piano, that magisterial piece to which all other furniture bowed. Here it is to the left as you enter the living room through the screen door from the porch. A slight breeze fanning you inward. Yes, the piano, upon which rests the brass lamp with its ivory shade, drawing out of the wood a monochromatic medley of calm golds and browns. If I turn to the right, there are the chairs that followed me through my Nigerian life like double first cousins. Built by Mr. Ballerinois and his staff of Yoruba carpenters at the hospital, they sit at a 45-degree angle, their cushions newly covered in green fabric because my mother's colors are always blue and green with accents of lavender. Within the angle, the beloved square table whose surface is an infinitely precious design of various inlaid woods. And I've never thought about it, but that table must have been an emblem of the great variety of people in Nigeria. Upon the table, recent copies of National Geographic. Here also the turntable out of which spins the Chopin Sonata I will play years later in my 8th grade recital. And the radio. Here my parents sit at night after I am asleep. I did not know it then, but now I come out. I did not see them then, but now I come out into the hallway and watch my mother reading The African Awakening by Basil Davidson. I'm going to have to sit down. To another missionary home in which you have to assume the posture of stargazing in order to see framed prints. Our dining table, a mahogany opera, was also built by those Yoruba craftsmen at the carpenter shop. They built most of our furniture. All my mother had to do was select a photograph of some coveted piece from Better Homes and Gardens, and those men could make it. Before meals, the table was set for us, just as in South Carolina, my mother's mother had someone lay her table. At dinner, served midday, we partook of fried chicken and saintly lima beans and mashed potatoes, and our one local food, sliced mangoes. Running about the Abomashaw bungalow on an average day, with my mother at work and with my father at work and my mother teaching at the nursing school, and Becky, the socialite, out calling on friends, my constellation of human contact was made up of a BK, my nursemaid, and our cooks, first Ashala, and then Sam, and later Abraham. My parents kept sending these young men to school so that they worked themselves out of help almost as soon as they got it. A BK was my mainstay, toting me to my first schoolroom, the Guava Tree Grove. Here I heard the gods calling, "The road does not need lies. The meek shall inherit the earth." It was a BK who called me back to the living. That time I fell on the hard cement floor of our porch and was knocked unconscious. I recall her application of Band-Aids on numerous less dramatic occasions. I sat on the toilet seat while she washed the wound, instructing me, "Be quieto, you're a big gal." Then she pressed the Band-Aid on and pulled me back to my feet in one robust movement. In the mornings, she helped me dress, her fingers slender and cool. I was silent when she touched me, out of respect for her hands. Once I sharpened all of my crayons until there was nothing left but a fluffy pile. "Elaine, what are you doing?" she demanded. But then she rather casually cleared the table with the aid of a nearby trash can. She and Sam laughed at me in unison when she supplied me with a large glass of water, which I called Loddle Loddle, because I swallowed with such eagerness my throat sounded toadish with each gulp. I did not know that I remembered Ashala until recently when I recovered an old photograph. Now I see that his face is older in memory than my own, with his ebony skin and his almost damaging smile, and what were to me the beautiful feathers across his cheeks. Sam was a petite man, and Abraham was large and imposing in stature, like the Old Testament prophet. His face was full of drama, but Sam's was like the evening, calm and abiding, like that hymn, "Abide with me, fast falls the eventide." On work days, these young men wore European-style short-sleeve shirts, But on Sunday in church, Abraham was dressed in Yoruba attire, an embroidered loose tunic that fell to below the knees and marvelous, prodigious sleeves folded back over the shoulders, flowing trousers along with sunglasses and a walking stick, though Abraham was only 18. One thing that's true about Southern Nigerians is that they are happy to show you they have enough of a thing. They put yards and yards of fabric into their traditional clothing, nothing like the tailored look Americans prefer. Such clothes are like jewelry. The more and the bigger, the better. If Yoruba parents have many children, they bring all of them to salute you, as the Shala once did on a Christmas Eve. And if you dine with a Yoruba couple, they provide enough food for an entire village if they have it to give. Nigerians believe in plenty. Even those who have small will hope to give you something. For example, a voluminous greeting. Nigerians don't say hi. E caro, se alafia mio. Good morning, how are you? E caro, aduque. Good morning, I am well. Elaine, how is your house? Owa, it is fine. Oganko, how is your husband? Owa, he is fine. Omonko, how are the children? Owa, they are fine. And then, of course, it has to go the other way. My mother says she did not understand Paul's injunction in the early churches not to spend too much time greeting the brethren until she got to Nigeria. This sociability may have been their Achilles heel with the British and with us. Nevertheless, Yoruba generosity was a governing element in the south of my youth. The first white missionary to visit Ibadan, which was a larger city south of Ibadan, was given a hog and 20,000 calories on his arrival. When he indicated that the gift was too rich, the chief simply responded that if the missionary complained again, he would have to double the amount. Thinking about this cultural trait leads me to wonder if what we think of as Southern hospitality may be Southern Nigerian hospitality, brought over on slave ships. Certainly in Nigeria, such hospitality is not self-effacing. It elevates the giver, showing his or her power to give. If you look at traditional Yoruba religious sayings, you can see that kindness and generosity are great virtues, and they are linked with wealth. Those who are kind have the unfailing blessing of Olodumare, God the Creator. Thus, the calabash of the kind splits not. The dish of the kind breaks not. It is both money and children that flow into the house of the kind. The Shala already had his beautiful children as proof, and later BK married a wealthy man, Sam became a pharmacist, and Abraham became a famous actor, traveling to Europe and the United States. Of our second furlough, first I remember, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, in 1960, I can report that most everything was white. Now, I grew up in, Ababashaw was 30,000 when I was born. It's currently 1 million. And I was telling someone yesterday, when I was growing up in Ababashaw, among 30,000 Nigerians, there were about 12 white people around. So my view of the world was quite different from what I found when I came to the U.S. And as I said, I just thought there were very few white people and they were missionaries. And then there was Yoruba land. start the section over. Of our second furlough in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, I can report that most everything was white. The Baptist church we attended was so white I needed sunglasses like Abraham. All the people there were white. The walls were white. In fact, the walls were so white I thought the paint was still wet and skimmed like a tightrope walker down the centers of rooms and hallways. I had never seen so many white people. I witnessed the movie The Snow Queen, or was it The Ice Queen? I cannot remember. But I do remember loads and loads of sleet that year falling on our borrowed lawn. I attended first grade in a trailer because the elementary school was brimming over with white children. Many things in the American South were sweet but not satisfying. The cherry cokes we bought at the corner store, chewing gum out of round machines, the plastic-looking narcissus that sprang up after all that sleet, summer peaches, which were fine as far as they went, but they did not go far enough. Not as far as a mango, whose palate is deep as graves. I sat rocking on my grandmother's porch looking out at all those azaleas and wondered about the news that I had a real family here, while my missionary aunts and uncles and all my Nigerian kin were apparently pretend. In my life in West Africa, I faced the same crises and anxieties that attend any growing up, but I hardly knew what was going on around me. I held a multitude of things in my heart, and they multiplied down endless compound paths. But I had little understanding of the vast trade winds that had swept the Lloyd Neals up out of Fairfax, South Carolina, and deposited them at the Gulf of Guinea. Only as I began to write about my early life did I begin to piece together all the fragments, tales of stories that went into making me Southern in Nigeria. A vital piece is my mother's family's ownership of slaves in the American South before the Civil War. I had learned vaguely about this history as a young adult, but I had not seen how this piece wove so intimately together the two Souths of my childhood, indeed the neighborhoods of my growing up. This is how I recognized that intimacy. As I am researching for my memoir, I find in a book a picture of the Ethiop River. The cold, sheer, given from God river I swam in as a girl, with white sandy bottom and booming vegetation surrounding it and fish of neon colors. This photograph is a true diviner's text. In the center, I see the mighty logs, 2 or 3 huge mahoganies and irokos, trimmed of branches and roots, almost perfect cylinders, attached parallel in sets of 2 or 3, which I often witnessed gliding down river, directed by a lone driver. I would dive out from the pier and hoist myself onto the great raft for a lift down to the next landing. I recognize the way the logs are tied together as they make their heavy and inevitable way to market. I can even feel those cool, slick trunks. Their destination, Sapele, the city near to me at that time. But Sapele brings Warri to mind, another city in our region, because it was equidistant from my home. And as I continue to read about the area, I make a discovery. Warri was a slave trading station in the 18th and early 19th centuries. When I look at a map of Africa and the Americas in African history and maps, I recognize an awful symmetry that rewrites my family history. A heavy black line connects the Nigerian coast with Charleston, South Carolina. The arrows pointing like the hand of God from one south to the other. What this means, the map key instructs, is that Africans were being exported from places like the mouth of the Ethiopia River through the West Indies and finally into places like my mother's grandmother's backyard. The Ethiopia is named for the first colonial boat that chugged up that tide current. Perhaps members of extended families of Nigerians I had met as a girl had been bound like those logs traveling down that swift stream. My mother grew up with Aunt Hale, an ex-slave who worked for her family. She remembers also Aunt Phoebe, another former slave and mulatto who was the intimate friend of her grandmother, Mary Rebecca Harder Deere. Did my great-great-grandfather purchase slaves from the Nigerian coast? Could Aunt Phoebe have had Yoruba ancestry? I venture to say that my family's first contact with Nigeria was by boat, but not the African Patriot. Contact may have begun much earlier, and I think this history is why my mother was compelled at an early age to become a missionary, and why she and my father ended up in Africa, and not just Africa, but Nigeria, and not just Nigeria, but the Nigerian South. I have come to believe that I am as much African as American. I am distinctly Southern in every case. As such, I participate in a great web of national and international histories as well as personal ones. I am bound to two Souths like a huge cresting arch. On the other hand, and in other ways, I belong to neither coast. I drift somewhere in the tepid mid-Atlantic, and still I claim for myself one location, one South. The accidental, purposeful, peculiar South of my beginnings in that Abomashaw bungalow, in those southern gardens of the guava tree, in the night market, in the voice of a BK, in the blues and greens of our living room, in the sandy veil of dry season air, even in the arms of the Ethiop, that daring cross of a river. Thank you.